Good morning, everybody. Let me pull up my introductory comments here. Welcome to the Policy, Finance, and HR meeting. My name is Esther Manheimer. I'm the mayor of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to our March 14th meeting. All committee members and staff are participating virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 5257. Your phone will be muted and you'll hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. And now go through and introduce the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hello.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Hello.
CFO Tony McDowell.
Good morning, everybody.
And Budget Manager Taylor Floyd.
Good morning.
Okay, we're going to begin our agenda, and I'm just pulling that up. All right, sorry, I've got one screen here, and I'm trying to multitask. So first, we're going to begin with our update from our CFO, Tony McDowell. So I'm going to turn it over. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. First, we're going to approve the minutes. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes. Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. I think I have to do a roll call vote. So Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
And Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Aye.
And myself, aye. All right, the minutes are approved. Now we'll turn to Tony McDowell for our CFO update.
Thanks, Mayor. Good morning, everybody. So we have one item this morning under the CFO update. And it's committee consideration of the new contract that we're going to be entering into with Cherry Beckert LLP for auditing these books for this fiscal year that ends on June 30th, 2023. So just a little background, I'll hit some of the highlights from the staff report. Under North Carolina General Statutes, all local governments in North Carolina are required to have an audit completed every year. And that audit is due to be turned in and sent to the Local Government Commission by October 31st of each year. And just as a quick aside, there is actually some legislation currently being considered in the General Assembly this session that would penalize local governments that missed that October 31st deadline by withholding our sales taxes until the audit is complete. Like I said, it's under consideration. The League of Municipalities has come out against that legislation, so we'll see where it goes. One of the things that I think concerns local governments with that particular legislation is the fact that there aren't as many firms like Cherry Beckert that are doing audit work in North Carolina anymore, and so a lot of local governments are struggling to find audit firms that are qualified and audit firms that can complete the work on time. So unfortunately, that legislation comes at a very inopportune time for local governments. Here at the city, we have an internal policy that we rotate our external audit firm at the end of each 5 years. And we've reached that point. We've been with the prior firm, PB Mayers, for 5 years. And so we've reached the point where we have to rotate if there's any other firms out there that are qualified, and there are. We did a request for proposals that we released back in January. Internal staff, along with the chair of the city's audit committee, reviewed those RFPs, and we are recommending to you all that we enter into a contract, like I said, with Cherry Beckert LLP to do the audit work both this year, and if that contract is successful and they complete the work on time, that we continue to utilize them for the following 4 years after that. I guess the last thing I would add before I turn it back over to you all for questions and comments is that the fee for the audit, and I think that's kind of on the next page, Alicia, for this year will be, we anticipate being $149,000. That's a little more than what we were paying with our prior firm, but we kind of anticipated a cost increase since we had not put this out for bid for the last 5 years. And there you can see under the fiscal impact that Alicia is showing our anticipated costs for the remainder of the contract period after this first year. So with that, I'll end and be happy to answer any questions. I think we were hoping to get from you all a motion to recommend this to City Council. We will be coming to City Council with this contract at your next meeting on March 28th. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, do we have a motion to move this forward to council?
This is Kim, so moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And I'll do another roll call vote. Councilwoman Kim Maroney.
Aye.
And Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
And myself, aye. All right, thank you. We'll move that forward to council. Next, we're going to get into the fiscal year 2023-2024 fees and charges recommendation. Council and staff are working hard to move through the budget process, and the manager will ultimately deliver her budget to council. And as a part of that, we're going to look at the piece that pertains just to fees and charges. And again, I'm going to turn it over to Tony McDowell, and I think we're going to also hear from Taylor Floyd on this item.
All right. Well, thanks again, Mayor. And I think Alicia is going to pull up the presentation we have for you all today. This is our fees and charges recommendations for fiscal year 2023-24. Taylor and I are going to be splitting presentation duties today. I'm going to handle the first 5 to 10 slides or so, and then I'll turn it over to Taylor for the rest of the presentation. We do have staff from departments here as well today. So if you all have any specific questions about the fees in any of the areas or what the revenue from the fees might fund, we'll be happy to answer those for you all today as well. So Alicia, you can go to the next slide. So just a quick overview of our outline today. So we're going to start with just a quick overview of the fees and charges process. Taylor's going to hit what I would call the major fee increases that we're looking at for next fiscal year. And I call those major because they're the ones that will impact most households in the city. And those include water services, stormwater, and solid waste. We also want to touch on some of the changes that are being recommended in Parks and Recreation, as well as some of the other minor changes that are under consideration as well. So next slide, please. So key takeaways from the presentation today is that, and I think you all know this, some of this is a repeat from our last meeting that we had with you all where we introduced the fees, but we wanted to make sure if there were folks from the community who were watching the presentation today, we wanted to make sure we went back and touched on some of the things that we talked about last time as well. And the first of those is that as you all know, we review fees and charges every year as a part of the budget process. And it's really one of the first things that we bring to this committee and to council for consideration as a part of that budget process. And we do that for a couple reasons. One is we want to make sure that if you all are supportive of any of the fee changes, that we get it done early so that we can build those revenue or build that into our revenue estimates for next fiscal year. And then it also allows us to begin the process of communicating to our customers what those potential fee changes may be. And I should mention here that all the fee changes that are under consideration, even though you all will be voting on them in later this month or early April, the fee changes would not take place until July 1st of this year to coincide with the start of the new fiscal year. Second key takeaway, and you'll see this in some of the slides we present in the next few slides, is that fees and charges represent a small portion of general fund revenue, but they are a major source of revenue for our enterprise funds, such as water and stormwater. And again, we have some slides that will demonstrate that here shortly. Our recommendations for fiscal year 2023-2024 include a continuation of the modest increases in household fees for water, stormwater, and solid waste that we have recommended last year and have typically recommend each year. And what we try to do with fees in those areas is we try to do modest increases each year to avoid those situations where we go a number of years without any increases, and then we have to do large increases to kind of get caught up. So we try to do small annual increases with those fees. And then finally, we want to point out that in certain areas, transit, parking, special event fees, we aren't recommending any changes for this year. Okay, next slide, please. So just quickly, and we did run through this last time with you all. So why charge a fee for a service? Again, there's multiple reasons. The first there that's listed is this customer versus community benefit. So we try to utilize fees when we have services that benefit specific users. And so things like parking fees, development services fees. For folks that are utilizing that city service, we try to utilize fees to recover the cost of providing those services, as opposed to utilizing taxes like property and sales taxes to recover those costs. Fees also allow us to ensure access. There's also certain areas where we're statutorily required to provide certain services, like in the areas around building inspections and such, and we charge fees in order to be able to recover the cost of providing those services. We look at a number of things when we consider our fees, and we bring you all changes each year. We obviously look at what is the cost of providing the service. We want to make sure our fees are in alignment with what the cost is to provide the service. We look at who benefits from the service. And again, this kind of goes back to that bullet point above in terms of the customer versus the community benefit. And then we utilize fee studies. We haven't done one in a couple of years, but we have done fee studies in the last 5 years or so to help guide us in terms of setting fees related to development services and parks and recreation, for example. So next slide. So again, getting into kind of an overview of how much revenue we get from fees each year. So this is our general fund budget, which is the largest portion of our budget at about 159 million. As I mentioned, in this particular fund, fees represent a very small percentage of the overall revenues for this fund. They're somewhere around 12% in total. And as you all know, the bulk of the revenue in the general fund comes from property and sales taxes. On the next slide, you'll see just the opposite situation in our enterprise funds. Again, as I mentioned, these funds are very much supported by fees and charges. The budgets for all of our enterprise funds total about 73 million, and fees and charges in terms of revenue make up about 73% of the overall revenue for those enterprise funds. Next slide. So getting into our specific recommendations for next year, and again, Taylor's going to cover all this in depth in his section of the presentation, but just wanted to start off by showing you all what the impact will be for a typical household in Asheville for some of the fee recommendations that Taylor's going to cover. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's really what we're talking about here are the three fees that pretty much all households in Asheville pay. That's the solid waste fee, the stormwater fee, and the water fee. All three of those fees are billed on our monthly or our bi-monthly utility bill, along with the MSD sewer fee. And so folks will be getting bills on a bi-monthly basis. And so the chart here demonstrates what that impact will be when folks get those bills. So every 2 months, they'll get a bill for these services under the proposed fee adjustments that we're looking at for next fiscal year. For the average household, that bill would go up by approximately $10.89. And then annualizing that over the course of a year, folks will be looking at an increase of approximately $65 in the fees that they pay for solid waste, stormwater, and water. And again, this is a residential customer. It's an average residential customer in terms of water use and in terms of where their property likely fits in our stormwater tiered fee structure. So next slide. So I think at that point, this is my point to turn it over to Taylor, and he's going to talk to you all a little bit more about some of the specific increases.
Thanks. Yeah, and if you all have any questions, please feel free to interject. We, as Tony mentioned, do have staff from departments with fee changes recommended here available to answer questions if I can't. So we can move on to the next slide. So for water, we did want to point out that their operating costs are split pretty evenly actually between capital and debt, personnel, and operating. And that capital and debt portion is a really significant and key piece of their budget. And one of the reasons that we're recommending some of this increase is to make sure that we're maintaining that capital investment in our water system. Next slide. So the increases that we are recommending are an increase to the base fee charged to customers, and that changes according to meter size. There is a slight difference as a percentage change. The larger meters, the percentage is a little higher, what we're recommending, than on the smaller meters. We're also recommending an increase in consumption fees charged based on volumetric water use. Those are a flat percentage increase. And then an increase to hydrant meter rental deposits. And that's really kind of specifically related to development activity. Next slide. So looking at how this is going to impact, again, kind of what we consider the average or normal residential user, we wanted to go back to FY20 to remind you all that we did actually lower the overall bill for a customer, and that was because of the loss of that capital fee that we used to charge. And so, if without that, I think we would say that this would, again, as Tony mentioned earlier, continue to incrementally increase as the cost of providing the service goes up. But we did have that dip in FY21. Next slide. So what are these fees going to fund? Several things. One is an additional maintenance crew. That crew will be focused on maintaining valves, hydrants, and other water infrastructure, just a need that's been identified within the water system. Some additional staffing to enhance overnight coverage at our water treatment plants. This one, I think, is critical given the challenges that we've faced in the water system previously, but communication and customer engagement, a position focused on that. We do have some departments that have public safety being a good example, fire and police that have dedicated communications folks outside of our CAPE team. So adding that to the water fund, an additional customer service staff to support the meter project transition. So that's just making sure that as folks get those new meters that we're able to, correct any billing issues and that goes smoothly. And then finally, again, continuing to recover the lost revenue from that capital fee that we are no longer able to charge. And again, we're doing that through adjustments both on that base fee and the volumetric usage. Next slide. Any questions about water before we move on?
This is Kim. I have one question about clarity. When I'm looking at the volumetric charges, is irrigation tied to our food systems? Or
when
can
you
we
say
like what the irrigation charge, why that's a breakout?
I'll have to ask David Melton to answer that question.
When you say is it tied to our food systems, say a little bit more about what you mean, Kim.
Well, I guess it would help me to understand why irrigation is a breakout and what the benefits are of it paying one of the highest rates.
So is Dave Melton here? I think I can't see all my little boxes. Okay.
Yes.
Is he here to talk about how irrigation works? I mean, I know a lot of it's for landscaping, but maybe he can expand on that.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is David Melton, Director of Water Resources. And that fee is specifically, I don't want to say targeted, but what it's for is mostly lawn irrigation. So it's at a higher rate because it's not a necessity, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other questions about water?
I have a couple more. Have we had equity or sustainability office have a look at these recommendations? I'm specifically wondering because it seems like an increase for brush removal could impact leaf removal. I don't know if we've made that connection and our goals for composting, waste reduction. I just wasn't sure if eyes have been put on that part.
Sorry, just to clarify, is that a question specifically about all of them or?
Yeah, I mean, I know that's not directly related to water, but so let me look it down a little bit farther, the list. So I know one of the things that we've brought up is council's goals around equitable, affordable housing. We did talk at the retreat about continuing the property tax mitigation, but we didn't talk about it at length. So when we were looking at that increase for residential, I'm having some heartburn around supporting the residential rate still being the highest increase over commercial in the volumetric charge bulk discount. And it would help if I understood that we've done some equity analysis, sustainability analysis.
Wait, on the solid waste or the water? Because a minute ago you mentioned the compost. I just got confused.
Yeah, sorry. I think the compost was coming at the wrong time.
Okay.
I think when I'm looking at the water rate, it's still, that question came up last year and the year before. I know that there was the dip in the fee, but that was because we were doing something we evidently weren't supposed to be doing. So that consideration aside, I get we're trying to catch up. And in the catch up, the fact that the residential is still paying more, the volumetric rate, it still looks like a bulk discount for those who use the most water. And I'm just trying to understand that better.
You know what would be helpful for us to see is a rate structure like all the way across where you have the residential, industrial, et cetera, and then kind of also comparisons to other cities. I know we have all that information and we've looked at all that before.
Yeah.
But as I understand water rate structures, the highest volume users do pay the lowest per gallon, and I don't know in the industry exactly why that is that way, other than I assume it has to do with economic pressures in order to support the economies that are and businesses that use high volumes of water. So I don't know if David wants to speak to that, but we've talked before about looking at the bigger rate picture.
Mayor, if I could ask David if he could respond to that. And yes, we've had a very detailed conversation about equity. And that is why you see the way that we were recommending increases was to be have at least as minimal impact in terms of the increase to make up, adjust to that loss of revenue. And in fact, again, we had reduced those fees earlier. But I think your question also, the second question, was specifically in terms of the difference between the percentage for residential versus non-residential users. David, can you comment on that? And yes, Mayor, you're right. We've had numerous conversations about this.
Right. Yeah, this definitely isn't a new topic. That's
Correct.
The part that's the sticking point.
Absolutely. David, please.
I'll be happy to. And the mayor described it as far as industry-wide pretty well there. And if you look at our rate structure, it's not a straight across the board for volumetric increase, but it's within decimal points. So it's really close. Where the difference comes in, and you can look at it a couple of ways, right? If you've got a manufacturer, they're going to use more water if you're looking at it on just purely a meter to meter basis, they're going to use a lot more water than a single family residence is. And where we make up some of that difference is in the base fees. So with a larger meter, which is typically what is commercial, industrial, that type business, they pay a higher base fee. And if they're a really large user, in which we have a small group that's billed monthly, there's also a ready to serve component worked into their rate structure as well. So, and we've talked about it a little bit before, where we're 90 to 95% residential. So if you look at it by class, most of the revenue is going to come from the residential class. Does that help, or does that further confuse things?
It adds to my understanding. It still makes it hard for me to support them.
Yeah, I think we've made this request before, but would it be helpful or possible to provide us with some context by looking at other cities and what they charge for residential, industrial, commercial users, so we can just kind of see how that lines up? I mean, I think Councilwoman Roney, if your overall challenge around this is that residential customers are always charged a higher rate per gallon than large users, it will probably never be satisfactory, because I don't think any water system is structured the other way, but I could be wrong. And maybe we need to drill down on that and find that out. But my understanding, because I remember a few years ago when we really did a deep dive on rate structure, we looked at a lot of other cities and tried to make sure we were in line with what cities are typically charging water customers. Anyway, that seemed to line up. So I don't know how easily we can get a hold of some of that information, but that might be helpful.
Thank you for that. I do think that when we're looking at other North Carolina cities, just also holding in mind that other North Carolina cities aren't Beer City, USA. So that's part of the curiosity I have around what other cities are exporting their water as an industry and providing this level of bulk discount for the economic development side, which is why I've pointed to the economic development impact.
So let me ask you a couple of questions. I mean, other cities are not necessarily beer city, but they definitely have high water commercial and industrial users. It could be for something totally different than beer. It's just used in manufacturing. It's used in all kinds of industrial and commercial uses. So I think are you saying because we have high water users that are using it for beer, that means that we need a different rate structure than a city that has supporting other industries and commercial users that are high users, but they're not in beer?
I think that it makes sense for us to look at benchmark North Carolina cities that also have high industrial water use as well. I just think that there is a part of our story that doesn't get told if we're only focusing on water that's not being exported. But
and when you say exported, I mean, it's not literally being exported. It stays within our system because our system isn't connected. I mean, typically water systems aren't able to export water because it is tied only to their, what do you mean by exported, I guess?
So I would say that when I go to other cities and see Asheville beer, it is exported water. It's just going in a can.
I see what you mean. The product is exported, yes. not actually the water. Yeah. Okay. But I understand. I'm figuring this out now. Thank you. Maggie, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I guess one is there a way that we could look at our manufacturer rates and kind of see what percentage of that does go into the beer industry? Because I feel like we still have a lot of water usage. I guess I don't know that it's like 90% of our manufacturing. It feels like the fear of exporting our beer might be bigger than the reality. And I'd be very curious to see if we could cut some of that information to see what percentage. And then I guess just on a philosophical, like, I don't understand, like, is there a problem with us having a beer industry that supports everybody in those jobs and that is part of how our economy moves forward? And
No.
We have an
Well, once again-
abundance of water. When we're looking at our climate data, rain is actually going to be one of our biggest things. So I think if we were in like an extremely water scarce region, it could feel a little different. But I don't know, when I hear that we're outsourcing our water, it sounds scary, but I don't understand what's wrong with that.
Thank you for that. I would say that over the past few years, some of the concerns that have been brought to me that are harder to measure are the impact of our tourism on our water as well. And it's harder to measure when I know that some facilities have their own laundry service, some don't. But I think that the main point for me is if we can have a bigger picture around why we offer a bulk discount. And I know that we say that it can be an economic development incentive tool. What is that tool, and what would be the impact of not offering such a deep discount while we're catching up, right, on our revenue?
David, did you have your hand up?
I did, and just for general information, one of the comparisons I use is the UNC School of Government Environmental Finance Center dashboard. And the comparison I like to use is similar custom income, which is based on the median income of households. And we're still below the median statewide with similar median household incomes where we're at. So if that gives a little bit of indication statewide where we rank, that's like I said, that's one of the rules of thumb I use to see where we're at.
Thank you.
I think that's helpful. I think if we could just, I guess I'm trying to figure out if I think what I'm hearing is just kind of an overall not philosophical, but just sort of a question about the industry normal standard operating procedure, which is that lower users pay a higher per gallon rate than higher users. And I think if I hear you correctly, Councilwoman Roney, you're just saying, I question that system. I wonder if that is the right system to be using, and whether we need to re-examine just the way that water rates are structured, period, I think is what I'm
Sure, I
getting.
can agree with that. It's not that I don't understand it, but it is that I wonder why we do that when we say our goals are equitable, affordable housing, because affordability is tied to the services that we provide too. And I know that we also can't get to our improvements that we need to make without charging fees. So the depth of the volumetric bulk discount is what's giving me pause.
So, Mayor, if I could, I believe, as you indicated earlier, that we provided some of this information maybe a year or two ago and had a fairly in-depth conversation around this issue. We can be prepared to bring that information back to you. I think the action on these fees for full council is due for action on the 28th. So we'll have that information as part of a follow-up to you all, and potentially as part of our presentation on this agenda item, if that will be acceptable.
Thank you.
I mean, philosophically, we are not going to get into the underlying issue of that approach. But what we can do is show you in comparison to other municipalities, particularly in North Carolina, where we are in our rate structure.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we can move on to the next slide then. So stormwater service and fees. And again, I think we have next slide, just an overview. One of the biggest challenges that we have with this service is our existing system needs some pretty significant deferred maintenance, which puts us in a reactive position and does not allow us to make investments in that system that allow us to achieve our stated goals and ensure that that service meets the level that I think we would like it to meet. Next slide. So one of the things that we have invested in over the last year is a review with a consultant that's currently underway and has helped us to identify some needs that you'll see in a minute. One of the pieces of that consultant review is a review of the fee structure, the current fee structure that we have in with the stormwater fees. That has not been completed yet, but we think that that should be done by the end of the summer of this calendar year. Next slide. So what we're proposing for stormwater fees are a continuing with the similar percentage increase to what we did last year, which was 15%. So just across the board, 15% change, again, with an acknowledgement that we are going to look more closely at the structure, the way that these fees are structured currently with that consultant study. Next slide. Then the items that we're looking at funding with that fee increase, one is an additional maintenance crew, again, just to support overall maintenance of the system, some additional staffing to enhance inspections, and that's really more about compliance with some of our federal mandates for privately owned construction or constructed stormwater devices. Another big investment we're looking to make is system mapping, and what that's going to do is give us a really good picture of the overall system, where we have infrastructure, its age, and where we may need to make investments in the system to improve it overall. And then finally, vehicle and equipment purchases, both for some of these new staff and just replacing equipment. Next slide. Any questions about stormwater before we move on there? Councilmember Ullman.
So the table in the slide deck and the table in the staff report are different for this one. I'm assuming there's lots of adjustments being made over time. So the slide deck one is the most recent.
It is. So a 15%, I apologize for that, but a 15% increase is what we are recommending.
Yeah, I just want to the rates for the different property sizes are different. So let's just, making sure that those two are squared up.
Yeah.
So could you go back to that slide, assuming that the one in the slide is the most recent? So these are lower than what we were seeing in the stock report. Okay.
I'm trying to pull that up right now. See if I can quickly tell you which one is the right one.
So I know we have some folks from Public Works on. I don't know if they're available and can confirm which rates, because I did their error on our part. Yes, there were definitely different rates between the staff report and the slides.
I'm sure you pulled so many different combinations as you were doing analysis, so it can be understandable that there's different versions that you've worked through. So just making sure that we can square that up, and that it would be helpful before voting to know which one is the one being voted on. Is it the
I'm actually pretty sure that the staff report is correct. I think this table is actually from last year.
Okay, and so the staff report one is, thank you. Yeah, let's just share that for everybody to see. Thank you. And so these numbers still represent 15%. They're just on a, okay.
We'll certainly update that for the council presentation. Go to the next slide. So sanitation, we can keep on going. Similarly, they need some additional staff positions just to keep up with the existing service level. So as we add collection points to this service, they need additional staff to service those collection points. We also see the cost of our existing service going up with our annual increases that are in the recycling collection and disposal contract, as well as Buncombe County landfill tipping fees. And then one other thing that we're looking to do is a review of operations, financing, and our existing ordinances through a solid waste master plan. Next slide. So to help offset the cost of that, we are looking at recommending a $1 per month increase for next fiscal year. In the current year, we actually did a $2 increase, partially due to the fact that we had not increased this fee in several years. The last time prior to the current fiscal year, we had increased the sanitation fee was FY17. So again, looking to make more incremental increases to continue to provide this service. Next slide. And then looking at the enhancements, again, we're looking at that solid waste master plan. That is a recommendation coming out of the Municipal Climate Action Plan, which I think you all are going to see at a council meeting very soon, if I'm not mistaken. So that is one place where we're definitely looking to make sure that we're continuing to work towards our sustainability goals. And then again, additional staffing to support those increased collection points. Next slide. Any questions there? All right, hearing none, we'll move on.
Before we do bring that to council for the climate action plan, can we get a more direct understanding on the fee impact? Whether it's a dollar figure or what the investment is or what percentage of our goals or something between this and that to make that connection.
Can you clarify that a little bit when you say a fee?
So can you go back to the 2 slides, I guess, before the questions? I know this isn't a question for today, so I would go back to forward 1, sorry. It would be great before we look at the climate action plan, if we could get a clear picture and making that connection between the solid waste master plan and this conversation. So once again, this isn't for today, just I think we might want to weave that dollar figure percentage of goals needed to be met, for example. I just didn't want to leave it behind.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Okay, so plan service enhancements, solid waste master plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to meet 1/4%, 50%? Unlikely. Do you know what I'm saying? It's
of our 50% waste reduction goal.
Yes. How are we?
I think the solid waste master plan will be doing analysis like that from looking at that in the past. I think that's why we need to do some master planning, and the technicals of that will involve analysis. So that's I don't know that measuring impact of an analysis that's going to happen in planning. I think that might be cart before the horse.
Yeah, I think I would characterize the plan is really giving us a roadmap to help us achieve the goals that we've laid out. And again, I think it's looking at not just the way that we're delivering the service, but also looking at our existing ordinances and making sure that they align with those goals and how we're even currently delivering service.
Thank you.
But that being said, I think we can certainly add some information that would clearly lay out the connection between the MCAP and the solid waste master plan. You can go to the next slide. So we did want to touch on the parks and recreation fees briefly, just because there were a large number and wanted to make sure that we were clear about what some of those changes were. Starting with some increases to fees for internment and other things at the Riverside Cemetery, and that's really just to support ongoing maintenance of that facility. There are some reductions, including usage fees for recreational and athletic or multi-purpose fields and facilities, reductions for the use of weight rooms, and some increases to the swimming pool fees. Next slide. We did want to hit a little bit on this one just to make sure, again, that we were clear about exactly what all of the changes encompass as it relates to after school and summer programming. So there is an increase recommended to the Fun Day Out inclement weather programming from $5 to $10 a day. We did want to make note that folks that are already enrolled in after school programs don't pay that fee. So if there is an inclement weather day, they're not paying that additional $10. That's just part of the after school programming that they're already getting. There are some new fees proposed for single day, and that really is an opportunity to lower the cost of service, because right now, if you were to just want one day of a week of summer camp, for example, you would have to pay for the whole week. So it's trying to provide some flexibility and then also open up some spots for additional folks to participate in those programs, so that if you are only using a day or two, you're not taking up a week's worth of space, if you will, in that program. And then finally, we wanted to mention that we do offer installment payment plans and other support to mitigate the financial burden for after school and summer programming on families. So again, just wanted to make sure that we were clear about what those changes actually meant for that service. Next slide. And then finally, just a quick hit of the other fee changes that are in the staff report. One is a change to the way the fee structure is structured for a specific tournament at Aston Park Tennis Center. The Nature Center is really just providing some fee flexibility, and that's really more about giving them some opportunity to do more dynamic programming and be able to charge a fee for that programming, rather than having it be quite as detailed as that fee structure is right now. And then finally, and I think as Tony mentioned, we have a number of fees that we charge for development, and we try to review those and make sure that they're recouping a percentage of the cost to deliver those review and inspections. So an increase to the stormwater development fees. And I think next slide. Yeah. So again, we review fees annually and bring forward recommendations early in the process. Fees are a small portion of the general fund, but a significant, or really the primary revenue source for enterprise funds, especially water and stormwater. Our recommendations for next fiscal year do include modest increases to those three fees that most households in the city pay, and we are not recommending any changes for transit parking or special event fees at present. I think that is the last slide that I have, but again, happy to answer any questions. Councilmember Ullman.
Going back to the Parks and Rec stuff, this might just be that my brain is still adjusting to daylight savings, but some of the why we're making these changes and the different line items that are changing, it's hard to track a little bit, especially like between the deck and the staff report. Like there's a lot of different line items, and I understand that. But if there's a way to kind of distill the strategies of which fees you're proposing to reduce or increase and the why, that would be helpful. Because I'm sure you didn't look at each line item and have an independent decision. I'm sure there's an overarching strategy towards Parks and Recreation goals, but it gets a little lost for me. So if you could help us, maybe by the time it comes to council next, really see what the thematic purpose is for which fees you're adjusting and why. It's just a little lost for me. I think what I'm hearing is that any fee reduction is just acknowledging that the folks that are using these services, it's hard to pay for childcare services, this, that, or the other. And so trying to provide some flexibility in that we can do that while still being financially responsible as a city. But I feel like I might be inferring some of that. So if we could have some of that crisped up, I think that would be helpful.
Sure, we can definitely do that.
If I could, I think we have D. Tyrell, Parks and Recreation Director. If he would like to speak to this issue, otherwise we'll definitely come back with additional information. But D, if you could just give us a little bit of information.
Yeah,
that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. I think Taylor did a good job just kind of providing the explanation. Maggie, I will ask you, is there something specific that stands out in those in the staff report, the pages that kind of go in depth into all of the fees and the changes within Parks and Rec that are being proposed?
I guess just like when I'm looking at the table in the staff report and like pages 6 and 7, it's like summer camp, for example. I think about all of the families out there like myself who love your services that, we're reducing the fee for non-resident, and then we're increasing some of the summer camp stuff. And then we're now charging a fee for city employees. Like if I were tomorrow to have a neighbor be like, hey, what's up with the fees and changes? I'm not really clear on the whys between the different areas here.
I mean,
Like,
other than
is there a
also-
thematic goal we're trying to go for?
Yeah.
Like, help me understand that bigger picture, because it just got lost for me.
Is it something other than cost of service? I assumed it was just cost of service, but is that what you're asking, Maggie? Like, why are we increasing the fees other than for cost of service? Because cost of service would be the number one reason I would
To
assume.
increase fees, yeah.
That would be part of it, cost of service, but also just the gravity of the number of people who are interested in these programs.
Oh, okay.
Also, especially our summer programs. As soon as these programs are open for registration, I mean, it's possible that they fill up within an hour. So we're taking a look at those high demand programs and assessing, can we be charging more? What does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And I know, like, from someone who is actively booking summer camps right now, like, the city is very competitive and affordable. And I think that's fantastic. But I think it's also wise to understand, are we tracking towards the other services so that you're recovering costs as you need to, but also being affordable. So it's just helpful to hear a little bit more of the thinking behind it. And I think sometimes just the table doesn't help understand the why behind it. So,
Okay.
Thanks.
I, as a mother who booked a ton of summer camps, never actually even got into any of the city programs because they booked up so fast. So,
Yes.
But there's some great offerings for
Yes.
programming.
Yep. Well loved. Thanks for providing them.
Any other questions? I think we've reached I believe, the end of this.
I still, if we could go back to, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but the sustainability office analysis, like, what is the goal of our potential impact for brush removal? Is it just cost of service, or are we trying to is the goal to get folks to do composting and reduce our waste? And will this help us get there?
Are you referring to the overall solid waste fee and where brush removal lives within that, or?
Yes. Like, how can we make that connection to get folks to reducing their own solid waste? And is this enough to get there? Is this not the right tool? Has sustainability looked at this?
I mean, I would say that I'm very excited that sustainability and sanitation are collaborating to pursue a solid waste master plan. I think that is going to get us to look up and look out towards our goals. I know that I'm also having conversations with the county's Commissioner Committee on Environment and Energy, and the reality that the landfill will close one day. And if we don't start collaborating even more aggressively to make sure that we extend that lifeline, we're going to be in trouble. And I think that the tool, is to do a bigger picture. I don't know that, I think the result of a solid waste master plan can have implications for how we're signaling what behaviors we want through the fees, but I think we need to do that planning. I'll say that when I was on staff as a sustainability director, we charged a garbage collection, or we charged a recycling collection fee, and we gave garbage for free. And we said, that is not the signal we want. And so there was the ability to kind of shift that to signal recycling as a service we want y'all to have. So I think after we have a bigger picture from the solid waste master plan, then how we're signaling through fees would be kind of a good domino series. But I think that big picture, how are we going to reach our 50% waste reduction goal? Now is that time, and that's what sustainability and sanitation are proposing with the master plan.
And Greg, if there is, or Jess, if there is any additional information you would like to share, but I think what I guess I would say is we are trying to connect the dots rather than looking at things individually. We are trying to look at sustainability, equity, and I would even go back to the Park and Rec philosophical approach is when you look at those fees individually, like you said, Maggie, you don't get the full picture of what we are trying to do. But I would suggest to you, we are trying to balance program demand and allocation of resources and an assessment of resources needed to deliver those services. And so we're increasing in some that may have low demand. And I mean, it's just it's a juggling act for us. But Greg, in terms of sustainability and solid waste connections.
Yes, thank you, Deborah. Greg Schuler, Public Works Director. The fee increase we're requesting right now is simply to keep up with the cost of providing the service, this basic core service. The solid waste master plan, I think Council Member Ullman did a really good job of explaining where we want to go. But this fee increase, just to be clear, is really focused on core service delivery. Jess is our solid waste division manager, and if you have anything to add, this would be a great time.
I think everybody's covered it. Thank you. We do work with sustainability on a daily basis, working on waste reduction initiatives and short and long-term planning. Was there a specific question about sustainability, sanitation, collaboration?
I guess what I'm really looking for and to be consistent is an equity and sustainability analysis when we're making decisions around fee increases.
Okay. So I do have, as part of our solid waste master plan, it will include looking at our fee structure for our services offered. It'll look at, not only what our best practices, but also, for some services that we provide, like brush collection and bulky collection, should that be charged to everyone, or should it be a la carte? And is it equitable how we're charging people who may overuse or underuse those services? Also looking at how fees are charged to businesses and multifamily units. We don't really even have a clear operational method for how we're servicing some of the new types of development that we see, like tiny homes, ADUs, mixed-use development. So I think there would be a fee study that looks at how we're providing service. Is it equitable? And, how do we need to change that to meet our goals, whether they're financial goals, sustainability goals, equity goals? Does that help?
Yes, thank you, Jess.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we go to public comment? No?
So, Mayor, are you not ready to make the recommendation?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Okay.
and that's fine.
No.
Can I ask before we do that, is it possible to break out the water resources fee, or are we going to send it as a whole package to council?
I'm fine with just sending this on to council. We don't necessarily have to vote on it. We've reviewed it, and I think we've asked a bunch of questions, and we're going to get a little additional information. So when this goes to the full council, we'll have some more background information and context. So I don't, it's not that I don't want to support it. I think we're just, I think what I'm hearing is just asking for a little bit of information before the final vote. And that's fine. Are you guys fine with that? We'll just move it forward and okay.
And Mayor, we'll have the additional information as part of your agenda briefing.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm going to go to general public comment, and let me see if I have I don't have any other. Yeah.
Did you vote?
No, we're not voting.
Okay,
that was the whole comment. That we're just moving it on to
right.
Council. Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have anyone in the queue for public comment? I don't have any instructions for what to say at this point. I could reiterate what I said earlier, that If you want to make public comment, you'll need to call in using the number 855-925-2801. That's 855-925-2801 and enter the meeting code 5257. And you'll need to push *3 to be in the speaker queue. Do we have anyone in the speaker queue?
No, there aren't any callers in the queue. I'm connected just to gather a transcript.
Okay. All right. Well, then I think unless there are any other questions, we're adjourned. All right.